evil reason the GOP will exploit every crisis the world is facing. That reason, by the way, can be summarized in one word: power. And probably a second word, the money that comes with power or that produces power. But what I want to flag for you, and I think this is really important to understand, is that the war in Ukraine is producing a series of consequences that are in the process and within a few months are going to seriously be impacting the world in ways that will damage or threaten to damage democracies. This is serious as death. I mean, this is really serious stuff. Americans, somehow, we're like, oh yeah, look at that, Putin's retreating, or whatever. I mean, we it's going to a stalemate. This is not the beginning of the end of this. I mean, here's the three things that the Republican Party has already essentially declared in the United States that they fully intend to exploit, and that you're going to see so-called conservative political parties, neo-fascist political parties in countries from obviously Hungary and Poland, they're already there, to France and Germany. You're going to see this right across Europe and around the world too, by the way. But I think the most immediate impact is going to be on Europe, and then secondarily on the United States this fall. That could destabilize democracies. And these three things are, number one, refugee crises. Number two, shortages and spikes in both the cost of food and fuel. In other words, inflation and shortages. And number three, a worldwide recession, which will come out of number two. So let's look at these one at a time here. The refugee crisis. Step in the Wayback Machine with me back to 2016. Donald Trump was running for president, and the main talking point that the Republicans were pushing at that time, keep in mind, Trump had kicked off his candidacy a year earlier in 2015 by saying that, Mexican rapists and murderers were coming to the United States. So the main Republican talking point was that Obama have left the southern border wide open and anybody who wanted could come into America. And of course, that became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were pounding on this on Fox News and on social media. The Russian trolls were amplifying it and doubling and tripling down on it. And guess what? American news doesn't just stay in America. It started popping up in Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua and El Salvador and southern Mexico, and people were going, oh, look at this. An American United States senator just said that the southern border is open. The largest cable news network in America just said that the southern border is open. Gee, maybe we should get in a car and head to the southern border of the United States. Look at this. Everybody's saying it. Not realizing that the Republican Party and Fox News were lying through their friggin' teeth. And what was the result of those people believing that? They showed up, they started caravans for the southern border. And what was the consequence of the caravans to the southern border? Donald Trump became president and the Republicans took control of the House and Senate in the 2016 elections. That was their main issue. Obama couldn't handle quack, quack, quack. So, understanding the impact that immigration can have on an election. Keep in mind, the thing that took Viktor Orban into power in Hungary was claiming that he was going to build a wall on the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees from the last time Vladimir Putin bombed a city into dust, Aleppo. So refugees coming into a country can flip the politics of that country. We saw that here in 2016. And that was with a few thousand Central Americans coming to the United States, a nation of 340 million people. But consider what's going on down, in Eastern Europe right now. Moldova, for example, it's a country that has 4 million people. They are on the Ukrainian border. They now are housing 360,000 refugees. 360,000 refugees in a country of 4 million people is the equivalent of 30 million, to use Trump's phrase, Mexicans invading America and actually getting here and setting up residence. 30 million. Can you imagine what American politics would look like if the caravans that came to the southern border in 2016 weren't just a few thousand people, but were 30 million people? That's what Moldova is dealing with right now, proportionally. Poland has 2.2 million Ukrainian refugees. They've got a population of 37 million. That's the equivalent of 21 million Mexicans or Central Americans making their way into the United States. And, you know, no matter how model these folks may be, no matter how well-behaved these refugees may be, most of them don't speak the language of the country that they're in now. They don't speak Polish, for example. Some are going to be criminals, even if their crimes are petty crimes like, theft or prostitution to try to, just get food and things, survival. Some will take jobs from good Poles or good Moldovans. Others will burden the social welfare system. They all need to eat and find housing, which is going to cause food shortages and raise housing prices. And guess what? It's already hitting. The head of the Law and Justice Party, this right-wing party in Poland, Jarosław Kaczynski, said, quote, "Refugees will not abide by Polish law." The former Interior Minister, Joachim Brudzinski, said they are young, horny bulls that are just called refugees. And the president of Poland, who is kind of a Donald Trump character himself, Andrzej Duda, says they carry the risk of possible epidemics. Hello, Donald Trump. So, number one, refugees. Number two, worldwide shortages and spikes in the cost of both food and fuel. Oil prices are rising. Now, we're still in this 15% production cut that Trump negotiated in 2020 with Saudi Arabia and Russia, which jacked up the price of oil. It's still there. But on top of that, you've got the hit from the war. And the Republicans are already on this. I got an email yesterday afternoon from America First Policy Institute from Rick Perry, the former U.S. Energy Secretary. He says, if you don't notice, gas prices are way up. President Biden is trying to use Russia's actions in Ukraine as an excuse for an increase in costs. The truth is that these prices were inevitable because of the actions President Biden has taken since his first day in office. Under President Trump, we invested in American energy, which boosted our economy and let Americans pay as little as $2 a gallon for gas. Apparently, he forgot we had a pandemic and demand collapsed. The Biden administration reversed the policies that gave us energy independence, embraced the radical Green New Deal, and forced us to again rely on foreign oil. So here you got Rick Perry completely forgetting about the pandemic and lying through his teeth in large part. But again, using this spike in oil prices, which is the result of Russia's war against Ukraine, as a political weapon here in the United States. It's going to happen all over the world. Gideon Rachman in the Financial Times yesterday, he said in the UK, households could see a 50% increase in energy bills by next month in April, followed by another 50% rise in October. You think that's not going to turn into politics? And if Germany actually succeeds in cutting off, Russian oil, you're going to see price spikes that will probably go well above 150%. And you're going to see shortages of gasoline, diesel, home heating, gas. You're going to see serious shortages in Europe. Again, if you think that's not going to turn into something political, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. We saw this before. We saw this when climate change caused the deserts in northern Africa to move south about 100 miles back in 2010. Actually, the price, it hit a peak in 2010. And wheat production collapsed in North Africa. That sent farmers into Damascus where they were protesting and demanding, basically welfare. And Assad, shot them, which produced the civil war in Syria that led to the Russian bombing of Aleppo. And it also is why that street vendor in Tunisia set himself on fire because of the increase in the price of wheat. He couldn't afford food. And that triggered the Arab Spring, which flipped Egypt from a democracy into a military dictatorship. And that was just a small increase in the price of wheat in one region. This is going to be worldwide. Russia and Ukraine account for 1/4 of the world's wheat exports. This is going to get bad. If you want proof that this is already baked into the Republicans' electoral plans, just check out the headlines right now. This over at the New York Post. The headline, Biden's inflation will doom Democrats in November. It's by Rich Lowry, who's a well-known conservative columnist. He says, elevated inflation represents a trifecta of doom for incumbent presidents. And by the way, he's right. It was inflation that took down Jerry Ford with his WIN program, Whip Inflation Now. If you're old enough, you remember those buttons that the Ford administration was passing out. And then Jimmy Carter came into office, and he still had high inflation, and that was one of the factors, along with Reagan, Bill Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, conspiring with the Iranians to hold the hostages until after the election in Iran. The so-called Iranian students holding American hostages at the U.S. embassy. But Carter had that inflation too. It typically takes, when you have a spike in inflation, we saw this after World War II, we saw this after the Civil War. We're seeing it right now. Well, and we saw it, after the Arab oil boycott of 1970, 73, I think? And then with the fall of the Shah in Iran in 1979 or 1980. We saw this every single time. We've seen the spike in inflation, and it takes about a decade to just kind of flush itself out of the economy. And typically the Fed runs in and says, oh yeah, we'll solve this problem by raising interest rates, and 9 out of 10 times they just produce a recession. But inflation continues because it takes a decade to flush inflation out of an economy. So anyhow, Rich Lowry is right about that. And he says it's coming, it's here. And he's talking about the 2020 election and how Republicans are going to use this. 2022, excuse me, this year's fall election, the elections this fall, and 2024, the presidential elections. He said, does it affect the lives of people in a discernible way that they will notice no matter what the president says? Yeah. Does it cut the pay of workers? Yes. Does it make the president seem powerless to control events? Again, Rich Lowry's absolutely right. And the Republicans are going to beat Democrats over the head with this. This is going to be their big thing. They're going to go at it. They're already doing it. They're literally already doing it. American Greatness website. The headline, Biden is unfit to lead in this perilous moment. The Blue State Conservative. The Biden crime family has been exposed. The black hole of depravity known as Hunter Biden's laptop. Oh, geez. And then America Out Loud, another one of the right-wing websites. Chile's economic destruction is a preview of what's in store for Biden's America. And they point out that America should cancel all payments to the UN for climate change programs, eliminate all climate regulations, and abolish all green taxes that are ruining our country. Right. So the Republicans are already all over this. They're already taking, the little inflation that we've got and trying to turn it into, oh my God, one huge, big deal. We're looking at 3 levels of crisis that are coming as a result of the war in Ukraine that Republicans are already starting to use against Democrats, and they're going to go into hyperdrive soon. The first is immigration. Now, we're not seeing so much of that here in the United States. President Biden just said he'd bring in 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. That's probably not going to create a crisis, particularly since they're white people. And, typically the whole immigrant crisis thing is about white racist Americans complaining about brown-skinned people. But it is going to create a crisis in Eastern Europe and all across Europe, actually. The second is this food, fuel, and the Fed conspiring to crash the market. The Fed has raised interest rates 9 times in the last 75 years to try to control inflation. 8 out of those 9 times produced a recession and basically didn't control inflation. It takes about a decade to flush inflation out of an economy. It's just that simple. We saw this after World War II. We saw this after the Arab oil embargo of '73. We saw it after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, 1980. And we're seeing it now, post-COVID. As Paul Krugman said, in his op-ed yesterday in the Washington Post, wrong diagnosis, wrong prescription. But the Fed is going to produce a recession. Excuse me, that was Robert Reich who said that. Paul Krugman said, quote, policy and events are seriously putting the brakes on the rapid expansion the U.S. economy has experienced since the pandemic recession. Same thing. So we're going to see food shortages. As I mentioned before the break, Russia and Ukraine, between the two of them, produce 1/4 of the world's food exports. We're going to see fuel shortages, particularly in Europe, as they cut off Russian fuel. And you're going to see soaring inflation. And that's going to be used to take down democracies. This coming crisis of war, refugees, food, fuel, a dysfunctional Fed, and a worldwide pandemic. By the way, China just shut down Shanghai. We're going to see more supply chain issues. Remember that from November of last year? Indeed. We're going to start seeing shortages in our stores, too, in all probability, if they continue doing this. Now, I don't have any easy answers for this, but I do think that forewarned is forearmed. We have to know that this is coming, and particularly at the political level, Democrats need to be planning for this. Republicans already are. They're all over this right now.